The Deep Dive. I'm your host, Manoj Atri, Realtor with RE/MAX Hallmark Realty Ltd. It is great to have you with us.
Good to be here.
So today, we're not just looking at data. We are trying to read the weather patterns of a very distinct climate. We are looking at the Toronto real estate market as it stands in, well, January 2026.
Right.
And if you're holding property in the city, or if you're trying to break into this market, the numbers we're seeing might feel, a bit contradictory.
It can give you vertigo, can't they?
Yeah.
You look at one column and it looks like a crash. You look at another and it looks like, well, stability.
Exactly. If you just scan the headlines, you don't know if you should be buying, selling, or hiding under the bed.
That's a good way to put it.
It is exactly it. There's this feeling out there. I was walking through a neighborhood in the West End yesterday, one of those streets that, 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, it would have been buzzing.
It would have been buzzing with for sale signs that disappeared in 3 days. Now, the signs are there, but they stay there. It's quiet.
It is quiet.
But it's not a graveyard. It feels more like a pause, a deep breath.
Pause is the right word, but I'd add a qualifier to it. It's a meaningful pause.
Okay.
It's not that nothing is happening. It's that the mechanism of the market is resetting.
How so?
Think of it like a transmission shifting gears. When you push the clutch in, there's that moment where the engine revs, but the car doesn't accelerate. That's where we are.
Right.
The tectonic plates, interest rates, buyer psychology, inventory levels, they're all shifting massively beneath our feet, but the surface movement appears slow.
And that is what we're here to unpack. We have the data from the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board for the entire region, the 416, the 905, condos detached, the works.
Everything.
But our mission today isn't to read a spreadsheet to you. Anyone can download a PDF. We need to figure out the story this market is telling us. Because my gut says there are patterns here that are being missed because everyone is obsessed with the negative top-line numbers.
We need to translate the market intelligence into human behavior. I mean, we are looking at a market that is largely friendlier to buyers than it has been in a decade.
The leverage has shifted completely.
Completely. And yet the data shows a market that is almost paralyzed by hesitation. The door is open, but nobody is walking through it. Why? That is the multi-million-dollar question.
Let's start with that atmosphere then. Let's call it Chapter 1, the Great Exhale.
I like that.
When we look at the volume of sales, the drop is stark. I mean, we're looking at sales being down roughly 19% year over year.
That's a fifth of the market activity just
Gone.
It is a massive volume drop, 19.3% to be precise. Now, we have to be careful how we interpret volume.
Right.
A drop in volume doesn't always equal a drop in desirability. In some cities, if volume drops 20%, it means everyone has left town, the factories closed, the lights went out.
That is not Toronto.
That is not Toronto. The population is growing faster than ever. The desire to live here hasn't changed.
So if the desire is there, where are the transactions?
It's a standoff, a classic high-stakes staring contest.
Okay.
On one side, you have the sellers. They're looking at the prices their neighbors got in 2022 or early 2024, and they're saying, that is my benchmark. I want that number.
They're anchored to the past.
Totally. And on the other side, you have buyers who are looking at their pre-approvals, looking at the monthly carrying costs, and saying, I literally cannot pay that.
And since neither side is willing to move,
The transaction doesn't happen. Exactly. It creates a void.
I want to dig into what that void feels like physically. I mean, a few years ago, walking into an open house was a contact sport.
Oh, for sure.
You'd have shoes piled up to the ceiling in the foyer. You'd be elbowing past 3 other couples in the kitchen. You felt the pressure.
The FOMO was palpable in the air.
Yes, the FOMO era. Right. But now, I've heard stories of agents holding open houses for 2 hours and having one person walk through.
Or zero. I've heard that too.
Or 0.
And that is the visceral reality of a 19% sales drop. It's the return of personal space, sure, but it's also the return of silence. And silence is terrifying for a seller. When you don't hear the phone ring, you start to question the asset. But for the buyer, that silence is the sound of opportunity.
It means the frenzy is gone.
It's gone. You aren't competing with 15 blind offers. You are likely the only person at the table.
This brings us to the metric of time. The report shows days on market is now sitting at 55 days.
55 days.
Now, to a layperson, or maybe someone listening from a smaller market outside the GTA, 55 days might sound reasonable. 2 months to sell a house. That's normal.
Yeah, but not here.
We need to put this in context for Toronto.
In the Toronto context, 55 days is an eternity. I mean, we have been conditioned for the better part of a decade to believe that if a house doesn't sell in 7 days, it's a lemon.
Right.
We are used to listing on Tuesday, offer night on Thursday, sold firm by Friday morning. That was the rhythm.
So what happens when that rhythm breaks? Walk us through the psychology of those 55 days. Let's start with the seller. Day 1, they're excited.
Day 1 is all hope. The sign goes up, the photos look great, you've decluttered, then day 7 comes.
Nothing.
No offers. Maybe a couple of showings, but the feedback is lukewarm. They liked it, but the price is a bit high. They liked it, but they are worried about the roof.
With a polite rejection.
Exactly. Then you hit day 21, 3 weeks. In the old market, you'd be panicking. Now you're just waiting. You start refreshing your email every 10 minutes. You call your agent. Is the market dead? Did we miss the window?
It must be agonizing.
By day 40, if you haven't adjusted your price, you start to feel resentment. You feel like the market is insulting your home. It requires an emotional fortitude that most sellers simply do not have.
And carrying costs. We can't forget that 55 days isn't just time, it's money.
It's huge money. If you have already bought another place, which is the cardinal sin in this market, but people do it, you're carrying 2 mortgages. 55 days means 2 mortgage payments, 2 sets of property taxes, 2 heating bills. That eats into your equity rapidly.
Okay, now flip the coin. What is 55 days for the buyer?
For the buyer, 55 days is the ultimate luxury. It is the gift of cognitive processing time.
That's a good way of putting it.
Remember the panic buying? You'd see a house for 15 minutes and you had to decide right then if you were going to sign away the next 25 years of your financial life.
It was reckless, frankly.
It was gambling. Now, you view the home, you go home, you sleep on it, you talk to your spouse, you look at the schools, you can actually drive by the neighborhood at night to see if it's noisy.
You can go back for a second viewing.
A second viewing, something that was unheard of in 2021. You can bring your parents, you can actually perform due diligence.
So it becomes a transaction of diligence rather than desperation.
It was the perfect phrase for it.
Okay, but this waiting game leads to a visual that confuses people. We see for sale signs everywhere. You said inventory's up over 20%, but the report says new listings are actually down about 13%. How can inventory be rising if fewer people are listing their homes?
This is the bathtub analogy, and it's critical for understanding January 2026.
Okay, I like analogies.
Imagine the housing market is a bathtub. The water coming out of the faucet represents new listings, people putting their homes up for sale.
Right.
That faucet has been turned down, the flow is weak. Sellers are hesitant to list because they know prices are soft.
So the water coming in is slow.
Very slow, but look at the drain. The drain represents sales. That just drain is clogged with hair and grime.
Oh?
The sales are down 19%. The water isn't leaving the tub. So even though you have a trickle coming in, the water level in the tub, the total active inventory keeps rising because nothing is exiting.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So the inventory we see sitting there isn't necessarily fresh, it's stale.
Precisely. It's accumulation, it's snow that hasn't melted, and this creates a backlog of choice for the buyer. If you are a buyer today, you aren't just looking at the 50 homes that came out this week.
You're looking at all the old ones too.
You are looking at those 50, plus the 200 from last month that haven't sold, plus the 100 from 2 months ago.
Which gives the buyer incredible leverage. But let's play devil's advocate. If I'm a buyer looking at stale inventory, am I not worried that I'm looking at the leftovers, the houses nobody wanted?
And that's the danger. We call it stigmatized inventory. But a smart buyer, a strategic buyer, knows that a house doesn't go bad like a loaf of bread.
Right.
The bricks are the same on day 1 as they are on day 60. Often, the only thing wrong with a stale listing is the price.
Just the price.
Just the price. If you can negotiate that price down to reality, you are getting the exact same asset that everyone ignored, but at a discount.
So the stigma is an opportunity, not a red flag, provided you do your homework.
Correct.
This brings us naturally to Chapter 2, the price reality. Because all this choice, this silence, this accumulation, it has to impact the number on the check.
Gravity always wins eventually.
I looked at the TREB report and saw the average selling price across the region. It has dipped back below the $1 million mark. We are at approximately $973,000.
The return of the 6-figure average, it's a symbolic threshold.
It really is. For years, the $1 million average was this psychological barrier. It was a badge of honor for the city's growth. But
a badge of terror for anyone trying to get in.
A badge of terror, exactly. So slipping below it, does it signal that the market is broken? Or is this just a recalibration?
It's a grounding. It's a return to reality. You have to understand, the run-up we saw during the pandemic was fueled by essentially free money. Rates were near zero. When money is free, asset prices inflate. Now that money has a cost again, the asset price must come down to compensate. It's a mathematical inevitability.
And we are seeing that.
Yeah.
A year-over-year price dip of about 6.5%. Now, headlines love words like plunge, crash, slash.
Oh, yeah.
Is 6.5% a crash?
No. A crash is when liquidity dries up and values drop 20, 30, 40% in a short window, usually accompanied by distressed selling.
People losing their homes?
People losing their homes because they can't pay the mortgage. We aren't seeing massive power of sale numbers. We aren't seeing foreclosures spiking. What we are seeing is a repricing.
So it's an orderly retreat, not a rout.
Exactly. It's an orderly adjustment to affordability. But let's dig into why prices aren't dropping further. Because if sales are down 20%, shouldn't prices be down 20%?
That's what Econ 101 would suggest. Supply exceeds demand, price falls.
But housing isn't a stock. You can't just hit sell on an app. It's people's homes.
Right.
Sellers have what we call downward stickiness. They refuse to sell at a loss unless they absolutely have to. So instead of dropping the price 20%, they just pull the listing. They exit the market.
Which restricts supply.
And that actually puts a floor under prices. It prevents the crash.
Let's talk about the broader economic context, because real estate doesn't happen in a vacuum. We have inflation down to 2.6%. The Bank of Canada rate is at 2.3%.
Those are numbers that should spark a rally.
Right. If I told you 3 years ago that rates would be 2.3% and inflation was tamed, you'd say, buy everything in sight.
Everything.
But that's not happening.
Because we have to look at real interest rates and the risk premium. Yes, the overnight rate is 2.3%. But what is the mortgage rate the consumer gets?
Good point.
It's likely still in the 4.5% to 5% range for a fixed term because of bond yields.
Why is the spread so high?
Risk. Banks are risk averse. And why are they risk averse? Look at the unemployment number in the report, 8.1%.
That is the number that jumped out at me. 8.1% unemployment in Toronto. That is significantly higher than the national average.
It is a high number. And that 8.1% is the wet blanket on the fire. This is the lag effect we have been warned about for 2 years.
Right.
The interest rate hikes of 2023 and 2024 have finally worked their way through the system and hit the job market.
Okay, so explain how that impacts the housing market specifically. Obviously, if you lose your job, you can't buy a house. But 92% of people have jobs. Why aren't they buying?
It's the shadow of unemployment. Even if you have a job, when unemployment is 8.1%, you are nervous. You see a colleague get laid off, you see a hiring freeze at your company, you worry about your year-end bonus.
And when you're worried about your income stability.
You do not take on an $800,000 mortgage. You hunker down.
So it's a confidence crisis.
It is. And on the bank's side, they look at 8.1% unemployment and they tighten the screws. The stress test becomes harder to pass, not because the rate is higher, but because they are scrutinizing your income stability much more aggressively. They are asking, is this income reliable?
So we have cheap money, technically, but we have fear, and fear wins.
Fear always wins in the short term.
Okay, we've painted the broad picture. Quiet streets, stale inventory, price softening, and job anxiety. But Toronto is massive. It's not a monolith.
Not at all.
What's happening in a condo in downtown is very different from a detached home in the suburbs.
We need to look at the tale of two markets. Chapter 3, the 416 versus the 905.
Let's start with the 416, the city of Toronto proper. The core. How is it weathering this storm?
The 416 is showing what we call structural resilience. Prices are down, yes, but the floor is much harder.
Why is that?
Because you cannot replicate the 416. You cannot build more land in Leslieville or High Park. The scarcity is real.
It's the location premium.
It is. Even with the sales drop, people need to be in the city for specific reasons. Yeah. Universities, hospitals, specialized jobs, culture. That demand is inelastic.
It doesn't just go away.
It doesn't go away just because rates are up, so the 416 holds its value better.
Now compare that to the 905, the suburban belt. Durham, Peel, York.
The 905 is where the drama is. We are seeing a much more distinct adjustment there. To understand why, we have to go back to 2021, 2022. What happened?
The drive until you qualify movement, remote work. Everyone fled the city for space.
Exactly. We saw prices in places like Oshawa, Milton, and Brampton skyrocket. I'm talking 40, 50% gains in very short periods.
It was wild.
It was an artificial boom driven by the idea that I never have to commute again.
And now?
Now, the return to office mandates are real. If you bought in Whitby thinking you'd never go to the office, and now you have to commute to Union Station 3 days a week, that commute is brutal. It's expensive. It's soul-sucking. Suddenly, that house in Whitby is less attractive.
So the commute tax is being priced back in.
Exactly. The premium for distance is eroding. The valuation in the suburbs is adjusting faster because it overshot the most.
Okay, let's talk about a specific scenario to illustrate this. Let's say I'm a buyer. Why does this 416,905 split matter to me?
It matters because of the reopening of the door. Imagine a family that wanted a yard in 2022. They looked at Mississauga, but they were priced out. It was $1.5 million for a decent detached house. They gave up.
They stayed in their condo.
Right. Now, fast forward to today, that same house in Mississauga might be listed for $1.25 million, and it's sitting there for 60 days. The seller is motivated.
So that family,
who thought the suburban dream was dead, suddenly has a shot. The 905 is becoming the value proposition again, not because prices are cheap, but because they have corrected from insane to understandable.
It's finding equilibrium. The suburbs aren't over. They're just returning to their traditional role.
Which is providing more space for less money than the city.
Which is how it always should have been.
The anomaly was when the suburbs cost the same as the city. That was never sustainable.
Let's drill deeper into the types of homes. Chapter 4, the property ladder. Because this is where the actionable advice lives.
This is where we do the math.
Okay, let's start at the top. The detached home, the fortress. Prices are down only about 2.8%. That is barely a scratch compared to the other segments.
Detached homes are the gold standard. They are the blue chip stocks of Toronto real estate. The people who own them generally have tremendous holding power.
Define holding power.
It means they don't have to sell. Many detached owners are boomers or Gen X. They've been in the house for 15, 20 years. They bought for $400,000. Even if the house drops from $2 million to $1.9 million, they are still up $1.5 million. They have equity. They have manageable mortgages. If the market is soft, they just say,
We'll wait
until next year. They remove the supply.
So they aren't desperate.
No. You rarely see panic selling in the detached market unless it's a divorce or an estate sale. That keeps prices sticky.
But look one rung down. Semis and townhouses. The data shows semis are down roughly 13% and townhouses down roughly 10%. That is a double-digit drop.
That's a real correction.
It is.
This is the narrative climax for our listeners. If you are listening to this deep dive looking for the alpha, the insight that makes you money, it is here. We are in the move-up window.
Let's break this down with hard numbers because you know people are going to want to see the math on this.
Let's do it. Okay, grab a napkin. Let's look at a typical move-up scenario. Let's say you own a condo in Liberty Village.
Okay.
In the peak of 2023, maybe that condo was worth $700,000.
Yeah.
You want to buy a semi-detached in the Junction.
Yeah.
In 2023, that semi was probably $1.3 million.
Okay, so the gap, the money I need to find is $600,000. Plus transaction costs, that is a massive bridge to cross.
It's huge. Now let's look at January 2026. Your condo has lost value. Condos are down about 8-9%. So maybe your $700K condo is now worth $640K.
So I feel poor. I lost $60K on paper.
You feel terrible. You don't want to sell.
Right.
But wait, look at the semi. That semi in the Junction is down 13%. That $1.3 million house is now maybe $1.13 million. It dropped $170,000.
Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this.
In 2023, the gap was $600,000. Today, $1.13 mess minus $640K is roughly $490,000. The gap on the ladder has shrunk by $110,000.
So even though I lost $60K on my sale, I saved $170K on my purchase. My net position is $110K better.
Exactly. You are wealthier in relative terms. In a down market, you lose on the small asset, but you win big on the large asset. The spread compresses.
This is why you call it the move-up window.
This is it. But it takes courage because human nature hates selling at a loss.
You have to swallow your pride on the sale to win on the purchase.
That is the strategy.
Now, let's talk about the bottom run. The condo entry point. Prices down 8-9%. Sales down significantly. We are hearing about a glut of condos.
The condo market is facing a supply shock, but it's a specific kind of supply. It's investor supply.
Explain that.
For 10 years, investors bought condos because they cash flowed. You put 20% down, the rent covered the mortgage. Easy money.
Right.
But with rates where they are, even at 4.5% mortgage rates and maintenance fees skyrocketing, the math doesn't work. Most investors are cash flow negative. They are feeding the alligator every month.
So they're bleeding $500, $800 a month just to hold the unit.
Exactly. And eventually they get tired of bleeding, so they list the unit. Get me out. That is why we see so many condos for sale.
Which is bad for investors,
Yeah.
but for a first-time buyer.
It's a playground. We have not seen this much selection in the condo market since the 90s. If you are a first-time buyer, you aren't fighting investors anymore. The investors are gone. You are the only game in town. You can negotiate price. You can negotiate closing dates. You can ask for them to paint the walls. You have power.
And you can actually choose a unit you like rather than just the one you won in a bidding war.
Correct. You can look for the layout that works for you, not just the shoebox that was available.
This leads perfectly into Chapter 5, buyer and seller psychology.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about the math, but real estate is what, 10% math and 90% emotion?
It is entirely emotional.
Let's get inside the head of a seller right now. We said they need fortitude. But what is the biggest mistake a seller makes in a transition market?
Chasing the market down.
Describe that for us.
It happens when you price with rearview mirror syndrome. You look at what your neighbor sold for 6 months ago and you list at that price.
Okay.
But the market has dropped 2% since then. So you sit, 30 days go by, you get no offers, you realize, okay, I'm too high, you drop the price 2%.
But by then,
The market has dropped another 1%, or the buyers have moved on to fresh listings. Your listing is now stale. It's stigmatized. People ask, why has it been on for 40 days?
right.
So you have to drop the price again, usually below market value, just to get attention. You end up selling for less than you would have if you had just priced it aggressively on day one.
So the advice is rip the Band-Aid off.
Price for today, or even better, price for tomorrow. If the market is trending down slightly, price just ahead of it. Be the best value on the shelf.
Now the buyer. What is the buyer's advantage beyond just price?
It's the return of conditions, and specifically the inspection condition.
Oh, man. I feel like we lost a generation of homes to uninspected purchases.
We did. We have people living in homes with cracked foundations and knob and tube wiring because they had to waive the inspection to win the bidding war.
Yeah.
That is over.
So now a buyer puts in an offer, and it says conditional on inspection.
Yes. They bring in an expert, they spend 3 hours, they crawl in the attic, and if they find $20,000 worth of work,
They can negotiate.
they go back to the seller and say, knock $20,000 off the price, or fix it, or we walk.
That is true negotiation.
It is, and the financing condition is even more important. With appraisals being strict, you need to know the bank is on board before you commit.
Yeah.
In 2021, you had to cross your fingers. Now you get it in writing, it makes the purchase safe.
So the bully offer, the act of barging in with a bag of cash and zero conditions, is dead.
The bully is sleeping. I won't say dead, because in the prime 416 neighborhoods on a rare house, it can still happen. But generally, the bully is hibernating. This is a market of diligence.
Let's look forward then. Chapter 6, the coil effect. Because markets don't stay in transition forever.
No. And this is the danger of waiting too long. We call it the coil.
Like a spring being compressed.
Exactly. Think about the sales drop again. Down 19%. Did 19% of the population decide they don't want a home? No. Did they stop getting married? Did they stop having kids? Did they stop divorcing?
Life happens regardless of interest rates.
Exactly. Household formation is still happening. People are graduating. Immigrants are arriving. Canada's population growth is still historic. These people need homes.
So where are they?
They are doubling up. They are staying in rental apartments longer than they want to. They are living in their parents' basements for an extra 2 years. But the desire to buy hasn't evaporated.
It's accumulating.
It is accumulating. It is pent-up demand. It is pressure building behind a dam.
And the dam is held up by high rates and job fear.
Correct. But what happens if rates drop another 50 basis points? Or what happens if unemployment peaks and starts to come down and confidence returns?
The dam breaks.
The dam breaks, and all that demand floods into the market at once. And here's the scary part. We have 12,000 active listings. It sounds like a lot.
But it's not.
But in a region of 7 million people, it is nothing. If 5,000 buyers decide to wake up in the same month, that inventory vanishes in 60 days.
And we are back to bidding wars.
We are back to price acceleration. We have seen this movie before. Toronto turns on a dime. In 2017, the market crashed. By 2019, it was roaring. In 2020, with COVID, it froze. By late 2020, it was on fire.
So the window of silence is fragile.
Extremely fragile.
So as we look to the spring outlook, what are the indicators? If I'm a listener, what am I watching?
Watch the new listings number. This is the supply side. If sellers stay fearful and don't list their homes in the spring, but buyers start to come out,
We'll have a supply crunch.
a supply crunch and prices will rise.
And on the demand side,
Watch the unemployment rate. If it ticks up to 9%, the market stays soft. If it stabilizes at 8.1% or starts to drop, confidence returns.
it's a delicate balance, a tightrope walk.
It is. But for the savvy individual, tightropes are where the opportunity is.
Let's summarize. We've covered a lot of ground today.
Let's distill it down to 4 points.
Okay, point one. The market has paused. Sales are down, inventory is stacking up, not because of a flood of listings, but because of a clogged drain.
Correct. The bathtub effect.
Point two. Prices have corrected. We are below the $1 threshold. The fever has broken. Affordability is improving, but high rates and job fear are keeping a lid on it.
Gravity is back.
Point three. The middle is the play. Semis and towns have dropped the most percentage-wise, creating a move-up window where the gap on the property ladder is smaller than it has been in years.
That's the strategic sweet spot.
And point four. Patience is the new currency. Sellers need fortitude to survive 55 days on market. Buyers have the luxury of diligence and conditions.
Time is the asset.
So leave us with a final thought, a philosophy for this market.
I'll say this. We look back at 2009. We look back at 2018. We look back at the mid-90s. At the time, those markets felt exactly like this. Gray, quiet, uncertain, scary. People said, don't buy, prices might drop more.
And today, looking back,
Today, the people who bought in those quiet moments look like geniuses. They look like visionaries. But they weren't mystics. They just had the courage to act when everyone else was hesitating. Warren Buffett says, be greedy when others are fearful. Right now, the Toronto real estate market is fearful. It takes a steady hand to see the opportunity in the silence.
be diligent when others are fearful.
Exactly.
I hope this deep dive has helped you see the patterns behind the headlines. Whether you're that move-up buyer scratching out the math on a napkin or a first-timer finally seeing a condo you actually like, there is a lane for you. You just have to look for it.
The data tells the story.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Manoj Atri, Realtor with RE/MAX Hallmark Realty Ltd. Until next time, keep watching the patterns, not just the prices.